All right, so I think we'll get started. I think there's still some folks joining, but I want to make sure we have the best use of the hour of everyone's time on a Friday afternoon. So first, I'd like to welcome everyone to our second wave of our Azure 123 webinar series. So this series was put together in conjunction with Microsoft to really target K through 12 institutions and really help them understand some various Microsoft technologies. In this first week, we're going to be starting with how to start your journey to the cloud with only $100 a month. So specifically, we're going to be looking today at Azure. For those that are new to it, we'll even be talking about some of the new stuff that's been announced in the last week or two after the big Microsoft Ignite conference. So my name is Rich Lilly. I am with Netrix LLC. We are a Microsoft Gold partner. I am based out of our Chicago office. And again, our goal is really to help get customers educated on Microsoft solutions and certainly help assist you as you look to potentially implement those solutions as well. I've been with Netrix for just over 2 years. My role is Cloud and Data Center Evangelist, Sales Engineering. Again, my goal here is just to primarily educate customers and also help do discovery and help identify vision and strategy for customers around specifically the Microsoft stack. A few shameless plugs for myself. I do run a blog that need to update. It's been a busy couple of months at www.cloudabove.com. You can also find me at LinkedIn at the link in this deck as well. And if you feel like heckling me, you can feel free to reach out to me at Rich Lilly as well. Before we dive into today's agenda, I wanted to open up the floor to Simon from Microsoft. Simon, you want to just give yourself a quick introduction to the folks on the call and then just kind of kick off our series here? Simon, I'll unmute you if, sorry, sir. There we go, Simon. Mic is yours.
Afternoon, and thank you, Russell and Michelle for joining. Yeah, so as you both know, I'm the account executive for your territories. This agenda and this next hour was put together by myself and by Rich and the folks at Netrix because I really didn't think Microsoft tailored K through 12 specific as your need. So this is going to be a very informal kind of run through of what you get for your $1,200 minimum monetary commit. And again, you guys are both at similar positions where we want to make sure that you understand what the cloud is and the cost savings and flexible benefits that it gives you. Thanks, Rich.
No problem. Thanks, Simon. So with that, we'll get things kicked off. Just logistical items. We've got about an hour or so here. This will probably take about 45 to 50 minutes, and I'll usually open up and unmute the audience for any Q&A at the end of the session. If there's any questions throughout the session as well, feel free to type them in the IM window. We'll have Mallory kind of acting as proctor, so if there's any if there's en masse questions I need to stop and pause on a specific topic, she'll inform me of so, and I can pause and go off on a tangent if need be. Otherwise, again, we'll take some time at the Q&A at the end. We also are recording the session for everyone as well, so for those that do attend or want to distribute internally or to other peers as well, we will be posting up both the content, being the deck, as well as a recording after the fact as well. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into today's agenda. So we're really going to break today into 5 different areas. One, we're going to kind of talk about, Azure. What can you get for $100? We're going to kind of talk about the journey to the cloud, Microsoft Azure's differentiation in the market. We're going to go into a little bit of infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, including some demos. So for those that haven't seen the portal or how to create a VM or how to manage, we're going to kind of go into that experience as well, so you can kind of see what that look and feel is, especially for folks that may be familiar with how they do this on premises today. And then we'll wrap by just talking about some common solutions that we've seen across other institutions, something that may be easy for you to adopt or a starting point for you all. And then again, we'll wrap with some Q&A at the end for everyone as well. So first, $100. Generally, I don't always have $100 in my pocket, but when I do, it can really buy a lot of things. So what I've put together is just a kind of smattering of what different Azure services you can get for $100. For instance, we can get up to 4 small virtual machines running 24/7 for 1 month. Almost 5 terabytes of storage in the cloud. 6 SQL PAS databases, 250 million DNS queries, almost 1.2 gig of CDN delivered content globally across the primary zones that Microsoft has. Backing up to 4 TB of data from a single on-prem server. Disaster recovery for up to 4 servers, 100 million push notifications, 800,000 IoT messages for anyone that's working with IoT. 43 gig of log analytics data, 50,000 minutes of automation, 1 app service, 1 standard, 1 app service, one of Microsoft's largest VMs, or I think currently the largest G5 series VMs with 32 cores, almost half a terabyte of memory, and 6.2 terabytes of storage. You can run that for 12 hours for maybe those high processing jobs or things you need those really heavy workloads for that you really can't support on-prem. And up to 2.5 TB of data lake transactions with 100 million transactions. This is just a small representation that I put together of some common workloads that either you may be interested in or just curious on what that $100 can buy you. But the goal here is for you to understand the breadth of what you can get. You can't get all of these for $100, but each one of these you can get for up to $100. And again, Microsoft is always adjusting the prices, so this is relevant as of today. Even as I updated this slide from last month, I already had to make 4 or 5 changes on this because Microsoft had gone ahead and actually reduced the price on a handful of these items as well. So again, just a great starting point to kind of give you a vision of what can you get for that minimum monthly monetary commit. So every institution is going to be in a different place from their cloud journey. Some are going to be early on and really still have a handful of servers and services they're delivering on premises. Some may be using cloud services, even outside of things like Azure and some of the other vendors out there. You may be consuming SaaS services. Maybe it's Blackboard, maybe it's various applications around HR management. But in some way, shape, or form, many institutions are using the cloud in some way. But really, we want to look to how do you really change the way you architect and do your internal systems and potentially deliver them out of the cloud. So, right now, I'd really say in the last 18 months has been the time to kind of really start and kickstart that innovation. So now how do we really understand and align that with, your overall institution needs and how it increases student and faculty productivity? So, when we talk about the cloud in general, there's a couple of main topics that come up. One is virtualization. In many cases, it's very likely that everyone on this call has a virtualized environment, whether it's running HyperV or VMware being the 2 market leaders, Zen Server, Red Hat, numerous options out there, obviously. But there's more to just virtualization and then just virtualization, and a lot of that is looking at things like leveraging automation and leveraging scale, elasticity, and stuff that becomes very difficult as you are maintained by a strict budget, and how you achieve these things in the cloud. The question that always comes up is it cheaper? That is always going to be an it depends concept. In a lot of cases, you will find the cloud will be cheaper in some areas and maybe not in others, but there may be cost savings from a soft perspective, or when you look at things like when you have to refresh that hardware, that storage, or that backup in 3 or 5 years, do I really need to invest in something that's going to be on-prem, and do I really need to touch and feel it, or do I really look at leveraging the cloud for some of those scenarios? A lot of things we hear from customers is their data centers are constrained. Again, this comes back to budget. I've got 5 VMware hosts that are 6 or 7 years old, and does it really make sense for me to have to go refresh that and the network gear and the backup gear and everything else, or do I look at starting to build some of that elasticity into the cloud as well? When we look at the cloud, there's a variety of services. There's traditional infrastructure as a service, which is simply just uplifting an on-premises virtual machine. A Linux VM, which a lot of folks who haven't dealt with Azure don't realize of the strong the strong Linux presence in Azure that Microsoft has, or Windows Server workloads. And again, this is no different than saying what you do today in provisioning in VMware and just provisioning that in the cloud with connectivity instead. We also have platform as a service, and this is giving you a more effective way of deploying cloud resources in many cases because I don't have to maintain the operating system or the application layer. Instead, I'm just delivering a service such as a SQL database or a website where, I'm taking a piece of the pie as having to manage the whole pie and the crust along with it. And then what's not represented on here as well is SaaS services. Again, examples like Blackboard may be an instance where you don't manage any of the layer, you just consume a service that someone else maintains. But all of these are managed in different respective ways. So when we look at the cloud service model, we really start with what you're likely doing today and with what most people know. And when we look at traditional on-prem, everything in purple is essentially the ownership of you and IT. So typically the bottom 4 layers there are some of the most costly, right? The networking gear, the storage gear, the servers, virtualization. This is what is typically your top 5 or 10 in your top 5 or 10 budget items. So how do we kind of remove the ownership or an onus of you having to manage that? And that's really where infrastructure as a service comes into play. So in infrastructure as a service, you really own the operating system layer itself. Microsoft can't log in, you have to log in, you still have to patch, you have to maintain, you have to install applications, but you remove some of the highest cost items, which are those bottom 4 layers. And then we actually get into what I was talking about with platform as a service, where in PaaS type instances, you don't even have to manage the operating system, the middleware, the runtime. That's all handled by Microsoft in the back end. Instead of having to own the SQL server, you just consume a SQL database, and therefore, you take and shift that onus off into Microsoft to manage that. And then last but not least, those SaaS vendors, you essentially are just consuming a service that's completely managed by someone else, whether it's another vendor that has services hosted on Azure, like say Citrix, or Blackboard, or any other type of other business applications. But again, you can kind of see where where you shift. The biggest 2 areas we see customers consuming themselves today, because SaaS is kind of outside that umbrella as someone else's consumed service. And moving to Azure is really focused on the middle 2 layers for obvious reasons, being the infrastructure and platform side. Now, for those folks that may be a little bit too deep for even some folks, I actually like to talk about pizza as a service, and this kind of equates the same model to something you can relate to. I'm a big pizza fan. I love a good pepperoni pizza, thin crust. But if we look at the left-hand side, we really look at traditional on-prem today is you're making everything. But as we go into the infrastructure model, that's more like a take and bake, say like a DiGiorno, or I love myself a good $5 Jack's pizza. As we move into the platform side, this is actually going out for delivery. So name your favorite delivery of choice. Everyone has one. And then dining out, going somewhere where essentially everything is completely handled for you. But again, every piece of this has a different ownership level and management capability. That also speaks to your responsibility. And I think these days when we talk about customers that are new to the cloud and what their responsibility is, there's different areas that you are still accountable for within your environment, whether it's you're on-prem, whether it's in the cloud, et cetera. As you can see in this left-hand chart, you still have levels of responsibility in, say, infrastructure as a service. You are still responsible for ensuring the firewall is locked down, making sure that you are patching the server, making sure you're updating the applications from an infrastructure perspective. But again, as you shift more to that right scenario towards platform, that moves off into a vendor such as Microsoft in this case. So this is a great chart of a good portion of the Microsoft Azure services, and this can be extremely overwhelming for folks that are new to the cloud. Today, we're really just going to focus on the infrastructure services, so that bottom tier that really sits just on top of Microsoft's data centers. Again, everything you see above that is what we consider platform services. So any of the things, if you're evaluating solutions around API management or streaming media services or Hadoop or SQL as a service, IoT, those are actually all considered platform as a service services. So we're not going to focus on those today. However, we do have a session coming up, I believe, in 2 weeks. They'll actually go a little bit deeper into development, and specifically development with Azure and the platform side of the fence as well. But really today is meant about building the foundation. So Microsoft Azure, what is it? We're going to kind of go into some of the basics. So Microsoft Azure is actually, I believe this number has been updated. I don't have a current slide. I think it's actually 40 or 41 today. I didn't grab all the updated content from Ignite. But as you can see, their kind of global breadth is there. And I know from a K through 12 institution perspective, that's probably not as relevant. But if we just focus in on the U.S. data center side, Microsoft has made strategic investments in various areas to deliver their services. And these are actually, some of these data centers are the same ones that, say, Office 365 are delivered out of if anyone's using any of those services today. So for any folks on the call there in the Illinois area or central region, there's a Microsoft region up in the just outside of Chicago. So you can actually see on 294 driving past a big gray building. That's actually one of their data centers in the region. When we look at that, though, again, you have options as far as how you want to deploy. And you may think about geo in cases of, well, what happens if there's a natural disaster or an unplanned event or something that I may need another region to fail over to and ensure that my my students and my faculty can still work. But again, just speaking to some of the breadth of areas of investment they've made. Actually, one I know that's not on here is a recently announced South African data center, which is a pretty interesting investment for Microsoft, being one of the first, I believe, in the country to actually be deploying a cloud data center. The other thing you should know as well is that every region is paired for geo redundancy. Now, I want to be clear that there's a sister or brother data center for every data center you were to deploy a workload into. That does not mean, I need to be very clear, that it doesn't mean that you're automatically going to be up and recovered in that other data center. There's tooling within Azure to help you with that process, but at the base level, this is all based on storage. So anytime you store data in an Azure region, so we'll pick up North Central US as an example, that data is stored across 3 separate fault domains in that data center. So when essentially if you think about writing a file, it's going to be written 3 times across that data center in different areas, across things like different power, different A and B power lines, separate network resource, separate storage arrays, so that if any single component in that data center fails, that your copy and your data is still available. Now, you do have the option, and that's called locally redundant storage, and that's default anytime you light up a service in Azure, as I'll show in a demo in a little bit. But as another option, you also have the ability of doing GRS, or globally redundant storage. And that actually allows you to automatically just replicate the storage content in up to 3 other regions. So now think about having up to 6 copies across 2 different data centers. Now, again, to be clear, you do have to recover that data either manually, or there's some Microsoft tooling we'll talk about, I believe, in another session. We'll talk about how to actually get that data back online and recover that with services such as Azure Site Recovery. But again, it's very important here to note that there's always kind of that pair as far as where your data sits, so that there's always not only local redundancy but geographic redundancy as well. So another fun fact as well. So Microsoft isn't typically thought of in the telecom space, but they are, depending on what day you ask, one of the top 2 telecom providers in the world at this point. That's because of all the fiber that they own and run across all of their global data center regions. Actually, I think it was announced last week that the transatlantic cable that was in partnership with Facebook and I believe a couple other institutions, I think it cost about $960 million, was actually run to give a much higher speed connectivity across continents, essentially. So that, I think, again, that was announced last week and that went live. And that's the subsea cable. If anyone's interested, go ahead and bing Microsoft subsea cable. There's a very, very interesting read in how that process lit up and what it took to kind of get to where they are today. But again, Microsoft, really becoming one of the top telecom providers. This also helps light up some other services for things like their Office 365 PSTN service and Cloud PBX as well. But again, that's recognized here through Azure as well. There's also ExpressRoute. So in the education space, we can actually peer with your I2 connections. So the nice thing is you can actually have up to 10 gig connectivity into the cloud. So again, today, if you're doing that between different campuses or you're doing that between different locations or regions, know that you can have that type of peering. And Microsoft actually has a peering point in Chicago. You can work with your ISP of choice to ensure that gets lit up. There's obviously a cost to doing so, but where we have typically seen concerns of customers in the past of speed and connectivity and latency, when we talk about ExpressRoute, that really allows us to integrate into your existing, if you have it on PLS, or provide a static dedicated connection to an Azure instance. And that really allows you to have those really high bandwidth connections for supporting production-based workloads in the cloud. And here just an example of some of the providers. So the next thing we talk about is trust and compliance. So we recognize that you may have to store sensitive data on these servers. So for folks that have strategic initiatives internally today to secure their workloads and ensure they're secure from attack and theft of student and faculty data, Microsoft maintains one of the largest compliancy lists of any cloud provider today. The nice thing too is a lot of this, for a good portion of them, they are just out of the box, right? We were trying to tackle this with an institution or a higher ed or someone in an enterprise company, they're spending, a lot of money in order to get auditors in there and make sure they're compliant, make sure everything's done properly, make sure it's secured, when a lot of the stuff we see within Azure is just there. And while things like SOC compliance and PCI may not be as relevant for an institution, there certainly speaks to the ability of them securing the content as it pertains to even things like FERPA and FIPS and HIPAA that may be relevant how they secure content, so and you can trust that your data is secure as they're going on their solution on their Azure cloud portfolio. So again, some of the broadest, I would say, coverage from a compliance perspective. So the next thing I'd like to talk through is just when we look at storing data in Azure, there are different levels of control, all the way from the physical access to the data center down to the infrastructure, to the network, and then even to your VM and applications that are deployed in Azure as well. We're not going to be able to get to all these today, especially as we get into the stuff that's helping you. But when we look at the physical data centers, if no one's ever done a tour before, it's funny that there's actually more security personnel than there are engineers, because they're so highly automated and designed for failure that it's more important to have more security folks than it is to have someone sit down and actually have to replace hard drives, which that's kind of a thing of the past. Barriers, fencing, two-factor access control, days of backup power, everything you would expect from a top-tier data center provider. I should also point out, if you ever get a chance to visit a data center, it's very interesting that you do actually get weighed when you go in and weighed when you go out. And Microsoft actually has a log of what all parts and everything weighs, so that they can understand if you walked out with a hard drive in your pocket, if you were even able to get to a hard drive for some instance. And not only is that done for their employees, but it's done for site visits by, say, customers as well. Now, when we talk about the Azure infrastructure and kind of the boundary around services you deploy in Azure, again, everything we've talked about from a compliance perspective, it's secure by design, right? This is not a layer on approach, an add-on approach. This is, out of the box. When you start lighting these up, you're getting this out of the box. On top of that, Microsoft also has penetration testing. They have DDoS protection, forensics. There's a great team that's out of Redmond called the Digital Crimes Unit. This unit is solely responsible for not only having blue team type of activity where they're attacking their own environment and knowing it's happening, but they also employ red teams. So these are folks that are not communicating with the rest of the internal team, that are often looked at attempting to breach their services. And it's very interesting to see kind of how they work together and not, in order to ensure security in all of your resources in the cloud. The other parts we'll start to dig into as we start talking about network and the applications, but again, you have essentially full control over how you want to present or not present resources to the cloud. One of the interesting things I think comes up quite often is that a lot of folks don't recognize that if I deploy a resource in the cloud, I doesn't necessarily mean it has to be public facing, meaning I don't actually have to ensure that an attacker could get to it, unless it's something like a web server or Citrix farm or something you may want to deliver out there to the public. Azure services can be delivered completely private to you over either a site-to-site tunnel, over a point-to-site tunnel, or, as I mentioned earlier, over this ExpressRoute. So don't just think about public cloud as publicly delivered services, but these can be delivered only to you in these scenarios. And a lot of the things that are mentioned in the network ring here really focus on how that's delivered. And then we start talking about some of the things Microsoft has invested in around securing your VM and applications. So Microsoft has a subset of security solutions that you can implement for some of those public-facing services that do things like anti-malware, intrusion detection. Their Azure Security Center solution can really look for those gaps and holes and helps you identify those for any of those public-facing services. And again, we're not going to dig deeply into that today, but happy to discuss in follow-ups if there's any questions. And this is just an example of what that security center looks like, more kind of like a green, yellow, red. How healthy are you, from a security perspective with any of your services deployed in the cloud. The other point I want to make too is, Microsoft, I would say more than every vendor out there, every other public cloud vendor has the most comprehensive hybrid capability. So, when we talk about things like any of your Office 365 services or any of the Azure services we're really talking about, the goal is integration with what you have on-prem today. We aren't here to tell you have to uplift everything you have to the cloud right out of the gate, because we realize that's a tough shift for someone to make. However, the hybrid capabilities allow us to take the right steps in the right manner to get there. We can have hybrid backup, we can have hybrid storage, we can have hybrid productivity. There are steps to get there versus just saying an uplift and you have to take and move everything to the cloud. We'd love to see you get there eventually, but we recognize that, again, there's the right steps to take to do that. Again, I think another piece that's really not talked about enough, and I know Microsoft talks about it a lot, but not enough in the community, is that Azure is really an open cloud. And Microsoft has made a significant shift in years past to really open this up. I forget the number, but I believe it's something like every about 50 to 60% of new VMs created today are actually Linux virtual machines. When people thought of Azure in the past, they thought of Windows. But when in fact, a majority of the stuff you see on here is not Windows at all. Down to things like Ubuntu and Red Hat and SUSE and Puppet, Chef, Nagios. Again, and there's more that are in just this list. There's hundreds, if not 1,000 or more, different solutions that are not only in Microsoft's catalog of supported solutions, but also vendors have a supportability list that they've already deployed their solutions on Azure. Again, when you even look at companies like Citrix, their Citrix Cloud is actually deployed in the backend on Azure. So other companies are obviously making investments in delivering SaaS solutions to you as a result of this. Again, for those that do run Red Hat today, last year was announced that there is going to be full Red Hat support on Azure. So, and not only that, but there's Red Hat licensing support. So you can actually procure a VM through Azure, and it's going to automatically license that for Red Hat for you. Or obviously, you can also bring your own license, which you can do for Microsoft workloads, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, as well as Red Hat workloads. The other thing we look at too is the catalog of apps. And again, my number was way low. I didn't have that right number memorized, but there's over 4,000 pre-configured Microsoft Azure solutions. If you want, go out and you can just Bing Azure Marketplace, and you can get to Microsoft's site and browse everything they have. This could range from Cisco to Juniper to Red Hat to Splunk to Veeam. I mean, again, numerous vendors have gone through the process of getting their solutions on and validated, even with ease of deployment of these options in the cloud as well over the past couple of years. And Microsoft's done a great job with these vendors to get that lit up. So we're going to dig a little bit now into specifically the infrastructure as a service area. So again, if you guys remember the foundation, it's right above the Microsoft data center side. This is really focused around compute, storage, and networking. When we think compute, this is infrastructure as a service. This is delivering a Windows or a Linux VM, for instance. This also allows us to deploy VMs in various means, like what are called availability sets and VM scale sets, and I'll get into some of those as we go along here as well. But the core of it, it's deploying a VM. Now that VM, that storage has to sit somewhere. So these sit on what are called Azure disks. These are either standard storage, which are traditional spinning or hybrid disks, and then we have Azure Premium, which is actually on SSD for those workloads that may necessitate higher IOPS. Microsoft also has hot and cool storage. So if there's data that's needs to be archived off, or there's data that you don't want to pay the higher rates for, excuse me, you can also have that deployed on cooler storage for a lower cost as well. And then there's even Azure Files where I can store files on Azure SMB shares as well. And then the Azure networking side, how do we connect it all together, right? On premises, we have switches, and we can plug network cables, or we can expose VNets or VLANs in our VMware HyperV environment. So connecting those all together is an important part, and that can all be done within Azure as well, down to things like ACLs and permissions to allow, disallow traffic, firewall, or segment things off. How you do it on premises is just shifted into a slightly different manner in UI or PowerShell in the cloud. And then connectivity is important. So how do we get our campus connected to the cloud? As I mentioned, the options already today around VPN or ExpressRoute. And then we can even have load balancers either within the service itself, which you can either do through Microsoft's native networking services, or even plug in solutions like F5 or Kemp or your solution of choice there as well. And then this is all managed in a couple of different ways. So one is for those that are very comfortable in JSON, Azure Resource Manager is the ability of creating kind of these templatized stamps of creating environments. For those that aren't as comfortable with that, the Azure portal is the next best thing. And I'll be primarily showing some of that today as well for you. So interesting slide. I actually pulled this from Ignite. So this is some of the stuff that Microsoft has done just in the last year, and just specifically the things that are highlighted up top. So these are all the things that Microsoft added literally in the last year since the last Ignite conference. And actually, there were some new ones announced here I'll get to in a second. But in the past, there was really only A, D, F, G, and H series VMs. Back in November, they started announcing A2, V2 with some local SSD. Burstable VMs were just announced. Some D and E flavor VMs for more high memory. L series for NoSQL type databases, M series for compute scenarios, or sorry, NC and NV for GPU accelerated. So these would be for scenarios where maybe you need to run a virtual AutoCAD instance, or you use GPUs for other type of processing of data for big data type solutions, or even M series, which are for very large enterprise apps, or even now some nested virtualization in the cloud as well. Even so, there was 3 new tiers added this year at Ignite as well. So these include the ND and NCV2 series. So these are Pascal generation NVIDIA P100s and P40 GPUs. And these are really for your top tier, specifically targeted at AI and ML type workloads. Whereas the other NC or the other NV series are really more focused on the video graphics side of it. But again, an interesting fact is some of the stuff that Microsoft has done around these series and their FPGAs are, leveraging GPU cores to accelerate types of activity. A great case study I saw out there is that Microsoft converted all of Wikipedia from English to, I believe it's Spanish, in under a second by just using the compute layer and the FPGAs that are used by some of these services. There's also announced last week with some partial core alternatives. So in instances where you need very, very high memory but very few cores, Microsoft has actually offered partial cores, and these are specifically used in scenarios for SQL or Oracle that are really looking at some very high in-memory type solutions. And then also announced last week was the burstable sizes as well. So these are very low base performance, but you have the ability of bursting on demand, and you can actually build credits and kind of feed it back into the system, if you will, for credits when you're not using those as well. Also, it's not very relevant in the EDU space, but we like to talk about some of the biggest and most powerful systems that are run today, and a lot of Microsoft's large enterprise customers, and everyone should be aware of SAP because it is quite a beast, especially SAP HANA. But some of the biggest workloads that were typically run on-prem before because of performance reasons, locale reasons, they needed to have near real-time or near physical performance. Workloads like SAP HANA running successfully in Azure with reference architectures are just a prime example of why no one really needs to have dedicated physical infrastructure any longer. So the next thing we get into is going to be really the storage and how and where this data sits. We're really today just going to focus on blob storage, which is where the Azure Virtual Machine disks hit. But in this case, we also have other storage types such as tables and queues, and we've talked about some of the disks and files as well. These are just really where all the data is going to be housed. When we talk about the data itself for Azure Infrastructure as a Service VMs, in the past, the max was actually only 1 TB per disk. And although you could string up to 32 disks together, there's a better way of doing that today with up to 4 TB disks. And in many cases, again, you can string those up to 12, 14, 16 plus disks as well. So, again, where we see, a lot of flat file data needing 60 terabytes or even 10 terabytes plus, this can give a little bit more flexibility for chaining disks together in an easier fashion for this as well. There's also support for smaller disk sizes. So in the past, you're really limited to 128 gig disks. There are smaller disks now that offer you up, for a little bit less foothold for any OS-based disks, or maybe things like 10 TB disks or things like that that don't need all the capacity, but maybe need the throughput. And then also announced at Ignite, I think actually just prior to Ignite, was the ability of actually doing nested virtualization in the cloud. So who'd have thought that I could run HyperV as a nested hypervisor on a VM in Azure and actually build out a full Hyper-V cluster in Azure. So with the DV3, EV3, and MVM series, that's all completely possible. And these are actually all setting the framework for specifically Hyper-V containers, which we're not going to go into today, but it's a fantastic thing for you to understand and learn. Took me some time to actually sit down and understand the concept and how it worked, but really containers are the way of the future, and we're seeing more and more interest spike up over the last few months, and really customers looking at leveraging containers and the future in the more near-term future than before. Microsoft has also made specific enhancements around the networking side of the within Azure or intra Azure components as well. So now with performance up to 30 gigabits. So again, we look at high performing I/O type of traffic. Having that capacity in the network layer to be able to do that is extremely important with low latency. So the other question I get asked quite often is, well, how do I get there? I've got a whole bunch of servers and resources on-prem today. Do I just have to build new and migrate? And the answer is, that's a great approach if you're moving to a new operating system, such as Server 2016 or a new Linux instance or distro. But there are absolutely ways to migrate your existing content as well. So Microsoft actually has a tool that's actually was primarily built as a disaster recovery tool called Azure Site Recovery that actually is also a tool for migrating workloads from on-prem to the cloud. And there's also some things announced last week around Azure Migrate, which I don't have all the details in here as well. But the goal here primarily is to look at getting your existing content migrated to the cloud. So again, that process is extremely seamless. I can replicate them online, fail them over in a matter of minutes. So it really minimizes the downtime of having to take large disks to the cloud, where I typically had to do something like that offline in the past. Very important to point out, this is not only Hyper-V, this is also VMware, this is also physical instances. So the great thing that Microsoft has done is, if you're migrating a workload in under 31 days, Azure Site Recovery is actually free to do so within that time period. So again, a great tool you have in your pocket that's free to help get your workloads uplifted to the cloud. Again, when we talk Azure networking, this is just a better visual representation of what Azure networking looks and feels like. So again, whether it's your decision whether you want to provide public-facing access to services, so you can even scrap that internet access if you want to. But the next step is really just getting that on-prem connectivity. And as you start talking about migrating workloads to the cloud, this is really one of the first steps. Now, not everyone has to move towards an ExpressRoute solution. You can establish a simple IPsec site-to-site tunnel with just about every VPN provider out there. Cisco, Juniper, etc. This is probably one of the most typical ways of just starting your journey to the cloud, is getting a space up in Azure, getting the network connected. In many cases, most of my customers just start by provisioning a domain controller. And that's really the first step to provisioning something in the Azure side, and really kind of the possibilities are endless from there. I'm not going to go deep into Azure Resource Manager today, but I want to point out that Azure Resource Manager is a very cool concept. I'm going to show an example of what Microsoft has done with ARM. But at the foundation, ARM is a framework of defining how I deploy a resource. And what this allows me to do is create repeatable deployment of instances in the cloud. So let's just say that I am an institution that I need to redeploy 30 new student lab machines, or a new SQL server for a SQL lab on a regular basis. That can actually be packaged up in an ARM template, and I literally can hit stop on the old one or reset on the old one. It would re-provision those new resources without me having to go through a wizard and hit next deploy 30 different times. So the concept of ARM is essentially me building a stamp of something that's going to be repeatable. And again, in institutions in K through 12, I really found this effective in looking at moving student lab type scenarios to the cloud as well. And again, I'll show an example of one of those. So let's actually go into a demonstration here. So what I'd like to walk you through is the Azure portal, and just simply creating a virtual machine. So this is the Azure portal for those that haven't seen it. If anyone's seen the Azure portal look a little bit different, that it was the Azure legacy portal that Microsoft is deprecating, I think, by the end of this year at some point. But really, we're going to focus on just creating a resource. So as I mentioned, the breadth of Microsoft services is almost ridiculous, more so than every other cloud provider. Here represents all the different areas that Microsoft has that I can deploy in the cloud. And you can see this is literally pages and pages and pages of options. We're going to keep it very simple today. we're going to create a new Windows Server virtual machine. So in here you can see, here's my Azure Marketplace that I referenced earlier. So I can either search the Marketplace or I can look at commonly created items. We're going to go create a Windows Server 2016 VM here, but if I wanted to, I can just as easily type in Red Hat, and we're going to get all the options in the catalog for deploying Red Hat instances. So here's a couple different examples that are out there today. Or if we want to go deploy something like Citrix. Citrix has actually co-developed a template to deploy Citrix NetScalers or full Citrix environments in Azure as well. Again, we're going to keep today very simple. So we're just going to go to the Compute tab, pull off our Red Hat filter here. We're going to build out Windows Server. And you can see here, here's all just the Windows Server operating systems that Microsoft is offering. For today, we're going to build out a Windows Server 2016 VM. We're going to go ahead and just hit Create here. And there's 4 basic steps to getting this VM created. So the first is giving your VM a friendly name. And this is just going to be the name as it appears in Azure. I'm just going to name mine Azure 123. This is unique, unique to you, meaning you can have the same name as someone else. It doesn't matter. It's not going to conflict. We don't need SSD for this one, so we're just going to choose a traditional spinning disk, and then we're going to create a username. And again, Microsoft doesn't have any backdoor accounts into your instance, which is why you define the username here, which is not accessible by anyone else. So, sorry, I'm going to walk at the same time here. That's actually going to be the username I'll log into the VM once it's done. We have a subscription. I'm not going to get into that much today, but a subscription just defines a boundary. And then we're actually going to use an existing resource group called Azure 123. So in this case, this resource group already has a network attached to it, may already be connected back to a site-to-site tunnel, but we're just going to use this as kind of a logical grouping of what I'm deploying today. And I can deploy other things into this as well. And then we're going to see the Azure region. So obviously here you can see all the Azure regions I was talking about. Today we're going to deploy this into North Central US. This last checkbox is important, and certainly it's a conversation you should have with Simon. If you guys have Microsoft licensing with software assurance today, you actually have the ability of reducing your VM cost by as much as 40%. The reason is when I create a Windows VM in Azure, I'm actually just renting the license for however long I have it, whether it's a day, a month, a year, 10 years. If you have software assurance, you already own the license. So when you check the box for yes, it actually allows you to reduce the cost of that by up to 40% in some instances. So again, you're essentially not renting the license. And now in this case, we don't have any SA, so I'm just going to check no. We're going to get some regular priced VMs. So we're going to hit OK here, and now we choose our size. And this is just a recommended set of sizes, but if we go into View All, you're going to see every size that we could deploy to here. And these are going to range from the smallest of the small, the biggest of the big. So, 1 core, 1 vCPU, 3.5 gig, all the way up through some of our largest in the bottom here. We go to like one of ours that's $16,000 a month, 16 core, 112 gig. Now again, dealer's choice on this and however you like to provision it. I don't need a very huge VM, so for this demo, we're going to choose just an A1 basic, and that. And if you remember my example, you can run 4 of these a month for under $100. So this VM has 1 CPU, 1.75 gigs of RAM. Maybe for many folks that may represent a domain controller or some type of monitoring server. We're going to pick select there, and you can see it shows me the price is $23.81. Now, based on your enterprise license agreement with Microsoft, that price will vary based on your licensing type. These prices are just based on my public rate with Microsoft today. So I'm not going to dig deep into all these, but you can see it's automatically connected this to a network. It is publishing a public IP so that I can RDP into it. If you didn't want to provide a public IP address, you can simply go up here into the public IP address, and you can just remove that. I'm not going to do that for this because I do want to be able to RDP to this, but I can just choose none there, and that would essentially not publish that over the web. Also, if you plan on testing in Azure, you can also set up auto shutdown, and this is because everything in Azure is billed by the minute. So when we look at that 23 and 70 cent VM, based on per minute, that's in the pennies per minute, I believe, to run that VM. If you have larger instances though, and you don't need them running all the time because they're not things that are doing stuff like domain controllers or file servers, you can use this new auto shutdown function to shut that down after hours or start it up after hours in instances as well. And then last but not least, we're going to hit OK here, and we're going to get our VM off and running. So this VM is going to take probably about 5 or 6 minutes. You can see the price is 0.032 cents per hour. So that's actually even less than a penny per minute when you break that down. But the interesting thing here is we also have this download templates. So what I can actually do here is if I have this VM configured exactly how I like it with the settings that I'm going to want to use every single time, I can actually add this to my library and redeploy this template, or I can download this and customize it further. For those that aren't comfortable in JSON or like Visual Studio, this may not be relevant to you, but get your template the way you want in the UI and export it, and that gives you a good place to start. So we're going to go ahead and hit purchase there, which the purchase just indicates that I'm getting that license from Microsoft here. And we'll check back on this VM again, about 5 minutes or so. We should have that VM up and running, and we'll walk through RDPing into that. So we got about 13 minutes left, so let me just dive back into the deck. We're going to skip over the platform as a service today because I want to leave some time for Q&A. For those that want to see any of the stuff on the platform side, feel free to send me a note after. I just had a quick demo on doing that, but I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. So, we talked about some options, but really, where do you start? So these represent, 9 different areas that you may want to start from an Azure perspective. And I've really taken a time to highlight 3 or 4 areas that would, are the most typical for most institutions today. So the first is backup, archive, and DR. This is probably the #1 that I've seen across almost every institution. Everyone has needs for backup, and storage adds up, and backing up storage over time and keeping archival adds up very quickly. And when you talk about the price of cloud storage today, it's so low that it's hard to compete with that for having to go out and buy even low-end SATA drives and drop them in an array and keep that maintained. Archive certainly, and then DR. A lot of the institutions I talk about are concerned about what happens if their server is BSOD, what happens if their site goes down, what happens if they lose connectivity. These are all things that are relevant to a lot of the institutions I work with. So, if anywhere, this is probably one of the top areas that I see a lot of my customers really start looking into the cloud. Also, another one we see quite often as well is development and test. So as you start looking at working in new solutions you want to try and deploy, what happens if you don't have the capacity for that new 5-server solution you're deploying? Think about deploying that in Azure, or if you're looking at testing Server 2016 or Windows 10 or Citrix 7.15, why not use the cloud where I can build it on demand, power it down, and not have to pay for it without time? The whole goal here is it's fast and easy to provision. I can test it in the same way it would be deployed on-prem, even if you plan on deploying it on-prem in the future. And again, the goal is to minimize waste and the cost of having to buy more hardware, more memory, or more storage to meet these needs. So again, one of the top areas, and it's not represented here as well, but certainly just extending your data center to Azure and getting a DC offers you some options right out of the gate. And then certainly as we start talking about more mature customers is deploying, multi-tier applications. So these may not be things, you're developing, but, you may have a vendor that you have deployed that has a student database or learning management system or other things that require SQL servers or Oracle or other things that can certainly be deployed in the cloud as well. So thinking about your next revision of that application, if it's not a SaaS solution, ask yourself, is there really a need to have to deploy that on premises? And I do have a quick demo of that as well, because Microsoft's done a great job of actually building some reference templates. Now, for those of you that ever have had to build SQL before, Microsoft has actually built a SQL cluster solution where I can build an entire SQL environment in the cloud. So we'll just go to the SQL Server Always On cluster. Now, what's really interesting is this is the power of ARM. So normally I would have to deploy 1 DC, 2 DCs, a SQL server, a file share witness, another server, configure SQL, go through the failover cluster configuration. The great thing about this template is this will deploy 100% of the environment and give you a functional SQL Server Always On environment. It takes about an hour and a half, I think, to deploy this environment. But literally, I just walk through the same wizard I walked through earlier. I'm not going to go through the entire wizard today. But that will literally bring up a fully functional SQL always-on cluster for you to test. No VM, no VM by VM deployment, no having to set up the load balancers, no having to set up the file share witness, not even having to set up SQL itself. It'll actually go through and install SQL per what you fill out in the template here. Especially for folks that are trying to get off older versions of SQL, this is probably one of the best ways to be able to go through and do that. And again, this is probably one of the best examples of Microsoft creating, using their own ARM templates and creating their logic to be able to deploy these. But again, just a simple example of how they use this to effectively deploy these other templates. So it looks like our other virtual machine is still deploying. So I'm going to actually just show the wrap-up slide, and then I'm going to actually open up the floor and unmute the audience for any questions. I'll also look in the chat window in here just a second. But I do want to point out before we get into that I do have upcoming sessions, or we have upcoming sessions the next 3 weeks as well. So the month of October, next Friday, we're actually digging deeper into the backup and DR solutions in Azure. So some of that easy starting point I talked about earlier is going to be next Friday's session. I have one of my peers developing new capabilities for your district with cloud app development. So as you're looking at developing applications and workloads in the cloud, this is great for any developers who are looking at putting new modern apps in the cloud. And our last session of the month is going to be focused on increasing your security posture around the cloud as well. So for folks that are interested on securing Azure workloads and even workloads that persist across into, say, for the Office 365 stuff, we'll be covering those topics as well. So let me just check on my VM one more time. So we'll come back to the VM. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for 1 second so I can check the chat window here. Looks like there's no questions in the IM window, so I'm going to actually go ahead and unmute the audience if you guys don't mind. If you have any questions, great. Feel free to unmute yourselves. Otherwise, I'll stick around for a minute here. And VM is still building. It may be up just after we wrap here. But let me go ahead and unmute the audience. If you guys have any questions, feel free to unmute. If you're busy or you're noisy, just feel free to type something in the chat window. So there we go. Everyone's unmuted. So again, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any questions.
I think it's just probably worth mentioning as well, Rich, that first of all, I think the next couple of sessions that we're doing in the month of October are very poignant, especially to the audience that's on. The second part is that Microsoft have deployment funds to help you do this. So again, you're not having to do this on your own. We can do the heavy lifting by paying a partner to be able to do this. And the last thing as well, which I think is probably of interest, is that on the 7th of November at the Aon Center in Chicago, we'll be holding a Ignite at K through 12 conference. There'll be 30 different tracks. Azure has definitely got 6 sessions, and again, I'll forward the agenda to you guys afterwards.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I would be remiss if I didn't mention our investment in the Ignited EDU content. So yeah, absolutely. If everyone hasn't gotten that invite, please, if you don't get an email from Simon after this, please reach out. We'd love to have everyone attend, and we're planning on spending essentially a day going deep into some of these topics and actually doing a repeat of some of these topics for folks that haven't seen it as well. So definitely look forward to seeing everyone there. If there's no more questions, we'll go ahead and stop the recording. And again, we'll be posting the deck out as well as publishing the video. So look for that content to come out here soon as well. And I do appreciate everyone's time over lunch on a Friday. So everyone have a great weekend and look forward to seeing you in the next session.